You remember how during the BLM protests of 2020 we had this very civil discourse about how to deal with some figures of the past? When we came together to discuss how to heal from atrocity together as one?
But it's very hard to get your bearings about that because so many roads are blocked off.
A black man who died after a police officer pressed his knee into his neck.
Yeah, me neither. Of course, one could argue that the statues in question are something we have to deal with, that they represent something so abhorrent, something so depraved, that they have to be dealt with accordingly. But one could argue also that they represent the glory of a bygone era, and to some, a means to derive a sense of identity from. But the person we are going to discuss today made me wonder. Could it be that sometimes a prominent person's name is tried to be erased out of envy rather than doing justice? That person I am talking about is Hatshepsut, a ruler that, despite all her noteworthy accomplishments, was tried to be erased from history and yet managed to be regarded as one of the greatest pharaohs in history. In this episode of heavily romanticized history lessons from the past, I will introduce to you Hatshepsut, perhaps the most accomplished female pharaoh of Egypt.
We have a liftoff, 32 minutes past the hour.
Yes, I put pharaoh in quotation marks, I know, calm down. It is for a reason. Hatshepsut actually wasn't a pharaoh, but co-regent. Well, at least according to early modern scholars. Her stepson and nephew, Thutmose III, was still a toddler when he ascended the throne, and his stepmother Hatshepsut made all the decisions in his name. She wasn't pharaoh of Egypt formally, but practically she definitely was. And contrary to early modern scholars argue that she in fact was a full-on pharaoh, and not just co-regent of her son, and that she actually assumed the title of pharaoh in 1478 BC, becoming the first female who actually had the powers of a pharaoh. She wasn't the first one though. Sobeknefru and Nitocris are two examples of women who also had assumed the title of pharaoh before Hatshepsut did. Now, before we go into her outstanding accomplishments, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment and tap the notification bell. You know the drill. In order to understand the scale of her accomplishments, I should first give you some context, and we need to go back in time a bit. Egypt has a very, very long history of almost 3,000 years. To put that into perspective, Cleopatra lived in an era closer to the invention of the iPhone than she did to the building of the pyramids. In order to deal with the long history of Egypt, scholars have divided those 3,000 years in three separate eras, respectively called the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms. In between these kingdoms, there are so-called intermediate periods. Contrary to the three kingdoms I just described, which are characterized as times of great building projects, expansion, and commerce, these intermediate periods are dark ages, characterized by times of chaos, decentralization, disruption of trade, and/or foreign rule. One of these foreign rulers are called the Hyksos, the history of which is largely unknown. What is known about them, however, is that they probably came from the Levant region and started to rule large parts of Egypt from 1638 creating the 15th dynasty until 1530 BC, when they were defeated by Ahmose I. They ruled Egypt during the Second Intermediate Periods, in between the Middle and New Kingdoms. These Hyksos, during their reign, disrupted many of the trading networks Egypt had built previously, including one to the land of Punt, of which historians say is somewhere around the area of modern-day Ethiopia and Somalia. When Hatshepsut ruled over Egypt during the 18th dynasty, almost 100 years after the Hyksos occupation ended, first of all, the land of Punt had become somewhat shrouded in mystery, becoming some kind of mythical land far, far away. Hatshepsut was the one who actually organized a Red Sea expedition to this mysterious land and brought back gold, ivory, ebony, incense, aromatic raisins, animal skins, live animals, eye makeup cosmetics, fragrant woods, and cinnamon. This is probably the worst exaggeration I have made so far, but imagine saying you are going to this mysterious land called Narnia and actually brought back a talking lion. I know it is a bad comparison, but I hope you see what I mean. There have been several expeditions to the land of Punt in earlier times, going back as far as the 25th century BC. The reason why Hatshepsut's expedition is so significant is because it symbolized a return to Egyptian imperial power after an intermediate period. Then there are the numerous of hundreds of building projects she commissioned, and I am not going to name all of them, that is going to be too much. She also used these projects to validate her legitimacy as pharaoh and therefore her legacy. She was terribly smart. What she did was that she legitimized her rule by ascribing to herself some sort of divine birth, giving her the divine right to rule in a relief, and also performed religious rituals which were previously only reserved for male pharaohs. She also depicted herself in male garments and wore things like the fake beard and the Nemes headdress in statues, for example. She also constructed a monument at the Temple of Karnak, which is something traditionally done by pharaohs, only further legitimizing her rule. Now, what she managed to do here is truly astonishing. Not only did she manage to legitimize her divine right to rule, but she also did politically by adopting the regalia of male pharaohs. And although Egypt was described as quite progressive, in the sense that men and women were practically equal to the law, it was still a mostly patriarchal society, in which women taking power was at the least mostly frowned upon. Now back to our initial question. Why was such a great ruler tried to be erased from history? Was it because she broke with tradition too much by ruling as a pharaoh? Or was it a more pragmatic and perhaps anticlimactical reason? The answer isn't entirely clear. Most likely it was an act of self-promotion, which is something pharaohs had done since the dawn of time. By erasing the imagery of predecessors, the current pharaoh could better propagandize their accomplishment. Another explanation is that it was for pragmatic reasons. You see, when Thutmose III took the throne, when his aunt Hatshepsut died, his son, who he wanted to be able to claim succession, had no genealogical line to Hatshepsut. So in order to secure the throne for his son, Thutmose had to erase the imagery of Hatshepsut. Interesting to note here is that the images of her presenting as female were left intact. Egyptologist Karakuni explains, Thutmose III waited until the end of his reign to systematically erase Hatshepsut's presence, because it was only then that he needed to shore up the legitimate kingship for a son who had no genealogical connection to Hatshepsut's side of the family. By removing his aunt, whose lofty and pure family connection sullied the aspirations of his own chosen son, Thutmose III was strengthening the history of his dynasty. But ultimately that plan failed. It is the very reason we are talking about Hatshepsut today. She is kind of like Joe Rogan. No matter how many times you try to cancel her, she always bounces back. Okay, that was the worst comparison I've made so far. I know, history very often feels like the polar opposite of sensation. Often, it is a lot more nuanced and actually pretty boring. And that is one of the reasons why I think we could actually learn so much from it. Hatshepsut must have been a very intelligent woman, and she used her intelligence in such a way that she managed to establish a great legacy. She used tradition to her advantage. She made use of continuity and tradition on one side, while at the same time breaking with the old and finding an intricate balance between the two, and used that balance in order to propel Egypt forward into a new future and re-establish her country as a global superpower at the time. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, leave a comment and subscribe. Also tap the notification bell and share this video. Talk to y'all later.